That reminds me of something you shared at Brian and I's wedding about your decision to change countries or to go to Mexico. Would you mind telling me the story of that process with you and Fern specifically?
Well, I've had a very varied life. Uh, we spent our first 17 years of ministry in Ecuador. By that time, we had 4 children, and we felt that it was probably advisable for us and the well-being of our family to maybe spend a few years in the United States to get our kids acculturated and get squared away so they could continue their studies in college. So we came home after 17 years in Ecuador, and, not knowing exactly what we were going to be doing. We assumed that we would at least make our headquarters in our home area of California. On our way home from Ecuador, we went through Chicago, which is the headquarters for our mission, sort of a debriefing session and contacts and so forth. And while we were there, we were invited to go out to dinner with a man who, with his wife, had visited us in Ecuador quite a few years before, and who had become quite interested in what we were doing. We went to this dinner. After the dinner, he looks at me and he says, "Well, what are you going to do, Marlon, now that you're home?" I says, "I don't know. I have no idea. I'm sure that the Lord will guide." And he looked at me and he says, "How would you like to run one of our retirement homes?" He says, "We've got a vacancy in Miami and we've got a brand new one in San Diego." I said, "I would love it." Fern said, "No way. I don't want to be around old people that are dying all the time." He says, "Well, I would suggest that when you head to California, you check out with the head of the board out there about the possibility of working at Mount Miguel Covenant Village in San Diego." So I did. Well, it took us, he happened to be on vacation. It was at least 2 weeks before I could make contact. When I finally reached him, Paul Larson, I asked him when it would be convenient to get together with him to talk about the possibilities at the village. He says, "There's no need for us to get together. We've already hired you." I said, "Wow." So it was a short time after that, I moved to San Diego, began my ministry at the retirement community, the brand new retirement community in San Diego. A month later, Fern and the family joined me, and we had the privilege of starting again something brand new. It was a beautiful facility with only 3 people, and the commission was to fill the building. Well, I did. I was there for a total of 7 years. I added 5 more buildings while I was there. The attendance or the residency went from 3 to 80, and finally I was sensing that the Lord was speaking to me about the possibility of going back to missions, and about the same time the leadership felt that it was probably time for me to move to another location and give me some new opportunities. And rather than accept that challenge, I told them that I sensed the Lord was calling me to missions again. Well, I told Fern that I wanted to go back to mission field. She says, no way, I don't want to leave my daughters here. They're not married. I just don't feel like I want to go. And I says, well, let me do this. I'll write the mission board, and if there is an opportunity, then we'll consider it. If there isn't, if the door's closed, then we'll know. So I wrote a letter to Chicago telling me about my availability, and I got a letter back immediately, within a couple of days. Yes, will you please go to Mexico City and start a church there? I said, wow, I've always wanted to go to Mexico in the first place. Now I'm going. Fern was very reluctant, but she did say yes, and we went to Mexico, and that's another whole story.
You had shared that when she was at the end of her life, you had shared a story about the end of her life and her reflections about this process you were just in.
Yeah, we went to Ecuador, to Mexico City. We only actually in Mexico City for 6 years, but during that time we were able to plant 3 more churches and make a lot of friends, and Mexico became a very real and vital part of our whole life experience. Many years later, Fern was now 82 years old. She was on her deathbed, and our youngest daughter, Jan, was with her on a Sunday morning before she died, and she talked to her mother and says, Mom, you had so many wonderful experiences. What was the most significant of all of them? She could hardly speak. She said, Mexico. The thing that she hated the worst became the greatest blessing. And it was such an affirmation of how the Lord leads. We don't understand. And sometimes we're fighting and kicking. But if we give in and go with the Lord, that's where the blessing is. What a way to end a life, rejoicing in what the Lord has done. A few days later, she was gone.